The morning Elliot Saunders got passed over for a cup of coffee was the same morning he stopped pretending his life made sense. It was just past 7:15 on a gray Tuesday in October, the kind of morning Halifax does best. Salt in the air, sky the color of old pewter, the waterfront already humming with the low churn of fishing boats and early commuters pulling their collars up against the wind. The Seaport Farmers Market hadn't opened its main doors yet, but around the south corner, tucked beside the bike racks and the old loading dock, a pale blue cart with hand-lettered signage had been doing steady business since 6. Periwinkle. The name was written in chalk above a chalkboard menu, the letters slightly uneven, like someone had done them in the dark, and liked the result anyway. Elliot had walked past it twice before. He noticed things like that. Efficient use of a corner, a well-designed board, a lineup that moved. He noticed it the way he noticed everything. Clinically, briefly, and then filed it away. He was 41 years old and the president of Saunders & Rowe Marine Logistics, a company his grandfather had started with 2 vessels and a handshake agreement in 1962, and which Elliot had grown into a quiet, unglamorous empire of port contracts, supply chain infrastructure, and the kind of work that kept coastal Canada moving without anyone knowing his name. That anonymity suited him fine. He joined the end of the line with his phone in one hand and a dry cleaning ticket he'd been carrying for 3 weeks in the other. The lineup was short. 7, maybe 8 people. A man in a high-vis vest with a thermos, a pair of women in nursing scrubs, a teenager with a backpack the size of a small country, and at the front, an elderly woman moving slowly with a canvas bag over one arm, her white hair pinned up under a yellow rain hat. The woman running the cart was somewhere in her mid-30s, dark red hair pulled back with a clip that had given up on half its job, a canvas apron over a navy sweater. She was talking to the elderly woman in the low, natural way people talk when they actually know each other. Not the practiced warmth of retail, but the real kind, the kind that doesn't need to perform. "Evelyn, I put an extra piece of the cardamom cake in there. Don't argue with me about it." The elderly woman, Evelyn, made a sound that was partly protest and partly pleasure. "You spoil me, Faye. You walked here from the North End in October. I'm going to spoil you." Elliot found himself watching longer than he meant to. He looked back at his phone. There were 14 unread messages from his COO, 3 from the Port Authority, and 1 from his sister that said, "Only call me when you're human again." He put the phone in his pocket. When he stepped up to the window, he was already framing his order. Large coffee, black. He was about to say it when the woman, Faye, apparently, held up one finger without looking at him and leaned sideways toward the man in the high-vis vest who was 2 people back. "Darren, I've only got the 1 bran muffin left. You want me to set it aside?" The man brightened. "You're a saint, Faye Murdoch. I'm a person who remembered you mentioned your wife made you quit sugar. Same thing." She scribbled something on a small paper bag and set it aside. Then she turned to Elliot with a look that was neither apologetic nor indifferent. "Sorry about that. What can I get you?" He wasn't offended. He was something stranger than that. He was disoriented. He couldn't remember the last time someone had looked past him in any room. Not because he was vain about it. Just because he was professionally, permanently, the person people looked toward. The person they waited on. The person they were afraid to interrupt. "Large coffee," he said. "Black." She poured it without ceremony. "Dark roast, paper cup, no sleeve, no logo." She slid it across the ledge. "You're not a regular," she said. It wasn't an accusation. Just an observation, delivered the same way she'd delivered the coffee, simply, without decoration. "No," he said. "First time's on the house if you tell me honestly what you think of it." He took a sip. It was very good. Not in a complicated way. Not in the way of the places downtown that charged $11 and used words like single origin and terroir. It was good the way a well-made thing is good. It tasted like it'd been paid attention to. "It's excellent," he said. She nodded, not pleased exactly, but satisfied. "Good. That'll be $2.50 then." He blinked. "I thought you said first time was free. If you were honest." She met his eyes for just a moment. "Most people say something polite. You said excellent like you meant it. That counts." He handed her a 5 and didn't wait for change. As he stepped away from the window, he turned his collar back up against the harbor wind and took another sip of the coffee and thought, for no reason he could name, "She doesn't know who I am." It had been a very long time since that was true of anyone. He came back the next morning, and the one after that. By the 4th day, Faye Murdoch had his order ready before he reached the window. Medium this time. He'd made the mistake of admitting on day 2 that large gave him heart palpitations by noon. one sugar, poured exactly the right temperature. She handed it over without preamble. "You're becoming a regular," she said. "Is that a problem?" She considered it with the same frank attention she gave everything. "Depends. Regulars I like, I remember their orders. Regulars I don't. I forget their names on purpose. Which category am I in?" Undecided. But she was already turning to the next customer, and the corner of her mouth had moved in a way that wasn't quite a smile but was in the same neighborhood. He started noticing things. The way she pressed a hot chocolate into the hands of a boy who came every morning at 7:30. Clearly waiting for the school bus, clearly underdressed for the weather, without ever making a thing of it. The way she knew which of her regulars were vegetarian, which were going through rough patches at home, which needed their order fast and which needed someone to talk to for 3 minutes before their shift. She didn't announce any of this. She just did it quietly, like it was part of the recipe. One morning he arrived to find her crouched outside the cart, helping a woman with a stroller try to fold it up one-handed, while the baby in her arms made its feelings about the whole situation loudly known. "I've got her," Faye said, and she took the baby. Just picked her up, easy as anything, while the mother worked on the stroller, and the baby stopped crying almost immediately, looking up at this stranger with the kind of trusting bewilderment only the very young can manage. Elliot stood watching this. He had that morning finalized a $43 million contract with a Norwegian port authority. He had done it via email before 6 a.m. from his kitchen in his bathrobe. He had felt nothing much about it. He felt nothing about this. "You're good with kids," he said when she'd handed the baby back and returned to the window. "I have a daughter," she said. "Eleanor. She's 9. She would have judged me very harshly if I'd just stood there." He smiled. It surprised him slightly, the smile. Sound reasoning. She's a sound person. There was something in Faye's voice when she said it. Not pride, exactly. Something quieter and fiercer than pride, something that had been tested and held. He found himself wanting to ask. He didn't. He took his coffee and went back to his morning, and that night, in the kitchen of the house he owned alone at the edge of the Northwest Arm, he poured a glass of water, and stood at the window looking out at the black harbor, and realized he hadn't thought about the Norwegian contract once. He'd been thinking about a 9-year-old named Eleanor he'd never met, and a woman with a hair clip losing its battle, and the way a stranger's kindness can feel, sometimes, like something you lost a long time ago and stopped looking for. He was 7 years old the first time he understood that the world didn't owe him anything. He'd been staying at the Cornerstone Shelter on Gottingen Street. This was before his aunt took custody, before things stabilized in the way they eventually, provisionally did. He remembered the dining room, the long tables, the smell of institutional soup. He remembered sitting by himself after dinner with a math worksheet from his teacher, trying to focus, trying to be invisible. He was good at invisible. A girl sat down across from him. She had a red marker in her hand and a paper bag lunch she'd already finished. She looked at his worksheet without invitation and said, "You've got number 7 wrong. The decimal's in the wrong place." He looked at it. She was right. He didn't know her name. She was maybe a year younger, maybe the same age. It was hard to tell. She had dark red hair, which he noticed the way you notice things at 7. As a simple fact, neither interesting nor uninteresting, just there. She stayed until he'd finished the worksheet, not helping exactly, just present, which was different and better. Before she left, she tore a piece off the brown paper bag, the clean bottom part, and wrote something on it with her marker. "You're smarter than you think." He'd kept it in the front pocket of his backpack for the rest of that year. He couldn't have explained why, even then. It wasn't the sentence. It was that someone had said it without needing anything back. He hadn't thought about it in years. He didn't know why it was coming back to him now. The morning everything changed began the way the good ones do. Quietly, without announcement, in ordinary light. Faye was telling him about a new supplier she'd found in the valley who grew heritage apples, and whether it made any sense to add a hot cider to the menu in November, when the cold really settled in. She was speaking with her hands the way she did when she was thinking through something, the ladle, moving without her noticing it. And Elliot was leaning against the edge of the cart watching her think, and forgetting again to pretend he wasn't. Then 3 things happened in quick succession. A black SUV with a press affiliate plate pulled up to the curb. A woman in a blazer stepped out with a camera operator behind her. And a man Elliot recognized, a former colleague from a board he'd sat on, someone he genuinely did not like, pointed in his direction from the far end of the market and said loudly, "That's him." That's Elliot Saunders. The camera swung around. Faye went still. The reporter was already moving. Mr. Saunders, Elliot Saunders, president of Saunders and Rowe. Can you comment on the speculation that the company is in acquisition talks with Pacific Meridian? And can you explain why you've been frequenting a farmer's market cart rather than— No comment. Elliot said it without moving, but his voice had changed. Something had closed in it. He turned to the camera operator. I'd ask you to respect that this is a private conversation. But the damage was already done. He turned back to Faye. She was standing very still with the ladle in her hand, looking at him with an expression he couldn't immediately read. It wasn't anger. It wasn't hurt. It was something more careful than either, the look of someone doing a very fast calculation about how wrong they'd been. Saunders and Rowe, she said. Not a question. Yes, the Saunders and Rowe. I understand why that's, you didn't tell me. Still not angry, worse, measured. You came here every morning and you let me talk to you, like you were a person who needed a cup of coffee and somewhere to stand for 10 minutes. And you didn't think to mention that you run one of the largest marine companies in the Atlantic provinces. I am a person who needed a cup of coffee, he said, and somewhere to stand. That's not the point. Then what is? She set the ladle down carefully. The point is that I don't like finding out things about people by accident. I don't like feeling like I missed something obvious. I don't like, she paused, and he could see her deciding how much to say. I don't like being the last to know. She turned back to the cart. The camera was still running somewhere behind him. He could hear the reporter doing a soft stand-up, narrating something about Halifax's billionaire shipping air an unexpected morning routine, and he wanted very badly to throw the camera into the harbor. Faye, he said. She didn't turn around. I wasn't hiding from you, he said. I was hiding from everything else. The cart was closed the next morning. A piece of cardboard taped over the chalkboard said back. Thursday in Faye's handwriting, the same slightly uneven letters as the signage, and Elliot stood in front of it for longer than made any sense and then walked 3 blocks to a coffee chain and drank something that tasted like a decision he regretted, standing up without speaking to anyone. Thursday came. He didn't go. He wasn't sure what he'd say. He went back to the routines that had sustained him for years. Early mornings, in thy office, a dinner with his COO, Marcus Webb, who had worked for him for 11 years and was one of the few people who could tell when Elliot was somewhere else in his head. You're distracted, Webb said, over the fish at a restaurant they'd been coming to since the company's last major expansion. I'm fine. You've asked me the same question about the Dartmouth contract twice. You never ask anything twice. Elliot set his fork down. There's a woman. Webb looked at him for a moment. Okay, it's complicated. Also, okay, I made a mistake. Webb picked up his wine. That's new. Elliot almost said something sharp and then didn't. She runs a coffee cart at the seaport. Her name is Faye Murdoch. She has a daughter named Eleanor. She gives bran muffins to a man on a diet and hot chocolate to a kid who's always cold, and she talked to me for 3 weeks, like I wasn't. He stopped. Like you weren't what? Like I wasn't the thing I've spent 20 years becoming. He looked at the window, the black harbor again, always the harbor. I should have told her who I was. Why didn't you? He thought about it seriously, the way he'd been trained to think about things, tracing the line back to where it started. Because the first morning, she looked right past me to make sure an old woman's order was right. And it was the first time in I don't know how long that someone wasn't performing for me, and I wanted to stay in that for a while. Webb was quiet for a moment. That's the mostest thing you've said to me in 11 years. Don't make a thing of it. I won't. But Webb set down his wine and looked at him steadily. Go fix it. He didn't know how to fix things quietly. He'd spent a career fixing things at scale. Contracts, infrastructure, labor negotiations. He knew how to solve problems with leverage, with process, with the application of consistent effort over time. He did not know how to stand outside a pale blue cart and say, I'm sorry I let you think I was ordinary to a woman who had seen through him from the first morning anyway. He thought about it for 4 days. He cleared his calendar on a Wednesday afternoon for the first time in years, told his assistant he was unavailable, and drove out to the valley. The apple orchard Faye had mentioned was called Ridgecroft, outside Wolfville, and the man who ran it, a weathered, suspicious third-generation farmer named Donald Pye, looked at Elliot's car and then at Elliot's coat and then said, You're not a journalist. No, media's been trying to get a quote from me about some shipping fellow. I don't know, some Halifax thing. That would be me, Elliot said. I'm not here about that. I'm here about the apples. Donald Pye looked at him for a long moment. You want to talk apples. I want to understand what Faye Murdoch saw in them. She mentioned your heritage varieties. She was thinking about adding something to her menu. Another long look. Then Donald Pye turned and walked toward the orchard and said, without looking back, well, come on then. They spent 2 hours walking through rows of trees Elliot had no framework for understanding, and he listened to an old farmer talk about bittersweet and bittersharp, and the difference between a cider apple and a dessert apple, and why the Gravenstein was underrated and never recovered its reputation after the war. He didn't pretend to understand all of it. He asked when he didn't. He took notes on his phone, the same phone that had 11 unread messages from the Port Authority. Before he left, Donald Pye pressed a brown paper bag of mixed apples into his hands without explanation. She comes out here herself every few weeks, he said. Brings the girl. The girl asks better questions than most adults. Elliot looked at the bag. Eleanor, that's the one. Donald Pye squinted at him. You planning to make things right? I'm trying to figure out how. Showing up is usually the start of it, the old man said. Everything else is just details. He was there when she opened on Thursday morning, 3 weeks, and everything had cracked open. He'd arrived early enough that the market hadn't filled yet, and he stood a few feet from the cart with the paper bag from Ridgecroft in his hands and waited. Faye came around the corner pulling a small equipment wagon, Eleanor beside her in a school coat, carrying a thermos with great seriousness. She saw him before Elliot could speak. She stopped walking. Eleanor looked from her mother to the stranger and back with the efficient social perception of a 9-year-old and said, Do you know him? I'm still deciding, Faye said. He looks nervous, Eleanor observed. Elliot looked down at her. She had her mother's coloring, her mother's directness, and what appeared to be a very firm opinion about everything. I am, he said to Eleanor, who appreciated the honesty enough to nod. Faye approached the cart without looking at him. He stepped forward and held out the bag. From Ridgecroft, he said. Donald Pye sends his regards. He told me the Gravenstein was underrated. I took notes. He held up his phone. I can send them to you if you're interested in the cider. Or not. That's not the point. Faye took the bag. She looked inside. She was quiet for a moment. Why did you go out there, she asked. Because you mentioned it, he said. And I wanted to understand what you saw. She looked up at him. The morning light off the harbor was pale and clear and cold. I should have told you who I was, he said, not because it matters for what I am here, but because you're a person who deserves to know the full truth of who she's talking to. And I robbed you of that. Not deliberately, but I should have corrected it sooner. I know that. Faye held the bag against her chest. Why didn't you? He'd asked himself this enough times now that the answer came plainly. I was 7 years old at a shelter on Gottingen Street. I was trying to do a math worksheet and a girl sat down across from me and told me I had the decimal in the wrong place. She didn't ask my name. She didn't need anything from me. She just sat there. He paused. Before she left, she wrote something on a piece of paper. I kept it for years. Faye had gone very still. She had red hair, he said quietly. Like yours. I've been trying not to notice that since the first morning. The harbor made it sound. A gull somewhere, the low chug of an early vessel. I don't remember every person from Gottingen, she said slowly. We were there 6 months. I was 7. She looked at the paper bag and then back at him. But I remember a boy with a worksheet. He was trying very hard not to cry, and I thought, she stopped. I thought someone should say something to him. Something true. They stood in the October morning in the ordinary light of the harbor, where something that had been in pieces for a very long time settled quietly back into its shape. I have to open the cart, Faye said. I know. She looked at him for another moment. Then she held out the bag of apples. You should hold these while I unlock. He took them. Eleanor appeared at his elbow and said without preamble, Can you reach the high shelf? Mum can't and she doesn't like asking. Yes, he said. Good, said Eleanor and marched into the cart. He came back every morning. Nothing was simple. Nothing in Faye's life had the luxury of being simple. There were mornings Eleanor was sick, and Faye ran the cart anyway, one eye on her phone, texting her neighbor who was sitting with the girl. There were weeks when the cart's refrigeration failed, and weeks when the market board raised the vendor fees, and weeks when a story ran in a Halifax business magazine about Elliot Saunders and his unconventional morning commute, which brought a wave of new customers and also a wave of people who took photos on their phones and asked him to confirm that he was, in fact, that Saunders. He was. He confirmed it briefly and then stepped out of the shot because it wasn't his cart and it wasn't his story. It was hers. He helped where he could in ways he was careful to keep proportionate. He fixed the refrigeration unit by calling the right person, which took him 4 minutes. He mentioned the market fee issue to someone on the board he'd known for 20 years, in the context of general conversation, nothing more. He was cautious about the line between helping and overriding, between offering and imposing, because Faye Murdoch had built something entirely her own, and he understood more than she knew what it cost to do that. She let him close the cart on the nights he was there. He did not take that lightly. Eleanor, for her part, developed a comprehensive and mostly accurate theory that Elliot was probably fine on the basis that he always asked before touching her things and never once told her that something she said was wrong without explaining why. She informed him of this assessment on a Tuesday afternoon while he was helping Faye repaint the cart, a project he'd been recruited into with very little negotiation, and he received it with the seriousness it deserved. "I appreciate the assessment," he said. "Don't say appreciate," Eleanor said. "It sounds like a business email." He looked at Faye. Faye was trying not to smile. "Fair point," he said. "You can just say thanks," Eleanor said. "Thanks," he said. "Better," said Eleanor, and went back to painting the bottom panel in a shade of blue she'd selected herself, a color she called Sirius Ocean, which was not the same, she had explained, as regular ocean. There was a night in late January when a nor'easter came in, hard off the Atlantic, and the power went out across the North End, and they sat in Faye's kitchen, with candles, and Eleanor's enormous collection of board games. And Elliot helped Eleanor beat her mother 3 times at a game that involved a great deal of yelling, and somewhere around 11, after Eleanor was asleep, Faye made tea on the gas burner, and they sat at the kitchen table and she said, "I want to tell you something." "Okay," he said. "When I was a kid at Göttingen, I was there because my dad had just left. My mum was doing her best, but her best at that point was pretty thin. And I used to watch people in that dining room and think, some of them are embarrassed to be here, and some of them aren't, and the ones who aren't embarrassed are the ones who've figured out that where you are doesn't determine who you are." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "I've carried that a long time. It's part of why I run the cart the way I do. You don't know what people are carrying. You just know they showed up. That's enough." Elliot thought about a worksheet with a decimal in the wrong place, about a piece of brown paper bag in a backpack pocket, about showing up at a harbor market in October for no reason he could explain and finding himself again seen. "I think," he said, "that you are the same person you were at 7, and that's not a common thing." She looked at him for a long moment. "You're better at this than I expected." "At what?" "At saying the thing you mean." She set her mug down. "Most people in your position talk around everything. I had a good example," he said. "A girl with a red marker who didn't bother." Faye was quiet. Then she reached across the table and covered his hand with hers, briefly warm and certain, like a thing that had been decided. The snow somewhere amid, and the harbor somewhere beyond it, did what it always did, and the candles burned, and neither of them needed to say anything more that night. The following spring, Periwinkle expanded. Not in the way Elliot had once imagined expansion worked. Not with a boardroom presentation and a phased rollout document and a risk assessment matrix. It happened because a woman named Gwen Ossie, who ran the community kitchen at the North End Recreation Center, came to Faye and said she'd heard about the cart and asked if Faye would want to partner on a community breakfast program 2 mornings a week. Faye said yes before Gwen had finished the sentence. Elliot heard about it the following Thursday. "You didn't ask me," he said. Faye looked at him. "Should I have?" He thought about it honestly. "No," he said. "I was just no, you shouldn't have." She smiled. "Good." Eleanor helped design the poster for the program. She used Sirius Ocean again, plus a yellow she called Real Sunrise, as distinct, she explained, from fake sunrise, which was apparently a pinkish color she found unconvincing. The program ran every Tuesday and Friday. Word spread the way things spread in a neighborhood that pays attention to itself, through the school, through the community board, through Gwen's network and Faye's regulars, and the man in the high-vis vest, who apparently knew everyone. By June, they were feeding 60 people a week. Elliot helped with the grant application. That was something he knew how to do. He sat at Faye's kitchen table one evening with a laptop and the relevant program guidelines and wrote a supporting letter that was direct and specific and contained no jargon, and Faye read it and said, "This doesn't sound like you. How does it sound?" Honest, she said. He looked at her. That's what I was going for. She handed it back. It's good, leave it. The grant came through in August. They had dinner to celebrate, the three of them, in a restaurant on the waterfront, where Eleanor ordered some called the Navigator's Plate entirely because of the name, and then informed them that it was actually very good, which she'd doubted. And she wanted it noted that she had been willing to take the risk. It was noted. Elliot looked at them across the table. This woman and this girl, this life that had been built from nothing, and kept carefully and run with more integrity than anything he'd built with $40 million. And he felt something he didn't have a business term for. He'd spent 20 years building things to last. He hadn't known what he was building toward. He knew now. He proposed in October, because everything between them seemed to begin in October. He did not do it in public. He did not hire anything, or arrange anything, or make a production of it. He did it at the end of a regular morning, after the last customer had gone, and Faye was wiping down the counter, and Eleanor was doing homework in the cart's back corner with her headphones on. He had one thing with him, a small piece of brown paper, not the original, which had been lost long ago to the accumulation of years, but a piece he'd torn from a paper bag the night before, the same kind and written on with a marker. He set it on the counter. Faye looked at it, then at him. You're still the best thing I ever ran into by accident. She picked it up. She read it twice. Eleanor appeared from the back, headphones around her neck, with the alert expression of someone who has been listening for longer than announced. Is this the part? Eleanor said. Where you ask. It is, Elliot said. Eleanor looked at her mother. I think you should say yes, she said. For the record. Faye laughed, a real one, the kind that caught her off guard. She put the paper in her apron pocket and looked at him with the same clear, direct look she'd given him the first morning. No performance, no ceremony, just the plain thing, straight. Yes, she said, obviously. Eleanor said finally and went back to her homework. The wedding was small, because both of them had independently decided large weddings were for people who needed to prove something, and neither of them did. The ceremony was at a chapel on the south end, on a Friday morning in the following April. While the harbor outside was doing its slow spring thaw, Donald Pye came down from Wolfville, which surprised everyone including Donald Pye. Gwen Ossie sat beside Webb, who had taken it upon himself to become an expert on apple varieties in the preceding months, and talked to Donald Pye for 45 minutes before the ceremony started. Eleanor wore serious ocean blue by request and unanimous consent. The piece of brown paper was framed, not the new one, both of them side by side. The words Faye had written at 7 in red marker, barely legible, slightly crooked. The words Elliot had written last October, on a night when he finally understood what it meant to say a thing and mean it. You're smarter than you think. You're still the best thing I ever ran into by accident. Faye opened the cart the next morning, because the cart was a reason and a purpose, and a promise, and those don't take days off. Elliot brought the coffee this time, 2 cups from the kitchen of the house they'd moved into together, balanced carefully as he walked the 3 blocks to the market. Eleanor was already there ahead of both of them, chalkboard marker in hand, updating the menu in her own slightly uneven letters. She'd added the hot cider. She'd written underneath it, in small print, warming, real, no shortcuts. Elliot read it. He looked at his wife, who was tying her apron, and not looking back at him, but smiling anyway. The small private smile he'd first seen from the corner of his eye on a gray October morning when he hadn't known yet what he was walking toward. He handed her a cup of coffee. She took it. Their hands were warm. Some things begin small enough that you don't notice them starting. A lineup, a cup of coffee, a child's handwriting on a piece of bag. And then one morning you look up and realize the whole shape of your life has shifted. Quietly and without drama. Towards someone who saw you clearly when you'd forgotten what that felt like. And that everything you built only meant something because she was in it.